Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Creating Monsters, or Let's Build Monsters. Who knows what I'm going to call this in the end, but for now, let's just jump right into what's going on here. I have a new tool that I am premiering today with this video. I have been really into Pathfinder 2nd Edition, so much that I started looking into their, monster creation process and how they go about doing this. Because of that, I decided to make my own tool. So we have very similar ideas of, an AC range for your monster, whatever CR you're going to pick it at. And then, some suggestions on low, moderate, high, max, or extreme for these different categories. And because it's for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, let's go and create a new type of black dragon. So we'll make ourselves a black dragon at, I'm going to go with CR8. And what's great is that the tool is already going to give us a whole bunch of suggestions, similar if you were to create a level 8 monster for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I've made some recommendations of, what the AC range for a monster should be. So for our dragon, dragons are usually on the higher end, so for the time being, let's go ahead and put in, high. And this is our AC. Now, you'll also see to the right here, I have an effective AC as well. Because of all the other factors that could go into play here, this can also affect the monster. Now that we have a relatively high AC, let's go ahead and counteract that with a somewhat low hit point range, because if we make our monster too high on the hit points and the AC, then we're getting more into a tank range, and we kind of want to balance these. So let's go ahead and we'll keep the hit points at low right now. And at 167 to 157 hit points, we're getting an average of 162 for a monster at CR8. If we went with a moderate, that is the expected hit point range for a CR8 monster. And this is going to be on the higher end, which could be a CR9 monster, or at least a DCR range. With the moderate, we could expect our monster to have a CR8 of hit points here. The low could be considered probably a CR7, and the high might be considered a CR9. With a high AC of 15, being, maybe a CR9 monster has, an AC of 15 roughly, we could then go with a lower end there to balance this out to give us a CR8 monster. Now, don't be worried about how we have, 17, 15, 13, and 11 here. You can actually go up to a 14 in your final product, and it shouldn't tweak the monster too terribly much, so we could probably change that without impacting the monster's final technical CR here. Now, we have our AC and our hit points picked out. Let's go ahead and pick some stats for our dragons. Let's go ahead and say, we'll go with a moderate strength. We'll go ahead and give our dragon here a higher dex range. Now, again, the suggestions are for an extreme of +5 being a CR8 monster with a low of 1. And you could go lower than that as well if you wanted to. You don't have to stick to these as suggested here. So let's see here. What else are we going to do? Constitution, definitely going to give the dragon here an extreme constitution for sure. Intelligence, we'll stick with a low. We'll give it a moderate in wisdom score, and just for the heck of it, let's also give it a moderate charisma. Now, over to the right here is our checkboxes for saves. What are they proficient in? Now remember, when we add in all of these checkboxes and we say our monsters are going to be proficient with strength and constitution, that's 0 to 2. So there's going to be no change here whatsoever to our effective AC. But once we hit 3, and we'll say, dexterity, constitution for sure, and then if we go to wisdom, you're going to see now that our effective AC has jumped up to 17, and we've hit the max that our CR8 monster should be at, in theory anyways, based off of the charts that I've been studying. If we were to add a 4th one and go with charisma, we're not going to see anything here, but if we were to add in a 5th or 6th one as well and go intelligence, then our AC jumps up to +4 over the base AC. So let's back this up a bit and just say our dragon here has proficiency saves with the big 3. Giving us a +2 AC bonus. Now, let's talk about damage. We have ourselves a 2-hit range and a damage range, and they're kind of cordoned off into 1 attack, 2 attacks, 3 and 4 attacks. But for the time being, let's not necessarily worry about the stats here lining up with the attacks down here as well. So, for instance, with our monster, or with our dragon that we're building, this black dragon, we could say, all right, it's going to be able to hit really well. We want it to be lower on the damage. So if we go with a higher extreme 2-hit, then we should go with a moderate or low for damage here. As long as you're within the suggested ranges here, and honestly, it seems like Pathfinder 2nd Edition also kind of follows this loose assignment of bonuses and stats, you're not going to be too terribly far off. It's not that important. So let's go ahead and see what we're going to do here for our attacks. You know, being a black dragon, maybe they're going to hit higher and harder. So let's go ahead and pick, you know, a moderate 2-hit chance. So we'll say +5. And if we go to a higher damage with 2d8 +3, or an average of 12 damage for our first attack. So we'll say maybe that's the bite attack. And then we'll go for, you know, a traditional claw. So a bite and a claw. So let's go with a reverse here. So maybe the claw is a little more dexterous. We'll say it's got a higher chance to hit, but it's doing low damage. So we'll keep the damage kind of low here for our claws. And then finally we could go into some more attacks here if we wanted to, but for now, I'd say, you know, the claw and the bite are probably our best bets. Now, on top of other things here, we do have our effective attack bonus and effective DPR. Now, over here, you'll see that the effective attack bonus will change if we choose anything from the attack bonus traits down here. But for a black dragon, maybe we don't, unless we want Ambusher. Ambusher could be an interesting way to engage this monster, so maybe they get a little bit of a jump here. And we could say, all right, we'll give them Ambusher, and then we'll see that our effective attack bonuses do in fact change. The next thing we're going to look at down here is the DC range and the spell hit range. So this is pretty similar to the attack range up here. What we're seeing here is what the effective DC should be, and you'll also notice that we only have extreme, high, and moderate. Now, in the terms of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, they suggest anything that is casting spells shouldn't necessarily have a low range. If they're on the lower end, they shouldn't be spellcasters. We can also use the DC range here for our dragon's, you know, breath attacks. It's a dragon, we're definitely going to have a breath attack, but we can't really put it into here, so we'll add that in later on. When we create the stat block for this monster. But for the time being, we could suggest, okay, do we want its dragon, so black dragon, we're going to say acid breath. Do we want it to be a bit on the higher end and harder to, you know, avoid, or a little bit on the lower end and easier to avoid? Let's stick with a high, and we'll go ahead and click that for a spell DC of 14. Now, I'm not necessarily worried about the spell attack bonus here because our dragon won't have spells to cast. Now, here's the interesting part over here. We are looking at AoE damage, and this is something I haven't considered before until I saw it in the charts for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And the first one here is unlimited use AoE damage versus limited use. Now, where does this come into play with dragons? Well, the limited use is where it comes into play with dragons. Our dragons generally only have an AoE attack on every 1 of 3 rounds of combat because they recharge usually on a 5 to 6. In this case, if we take almost half damage from unlimited uses, we can have a dragon that, you know, has a breath attack every round. Now, some ways to, you know, play with this a little bit is suggesting that instead of going with a huge, you know, 50-foot cone or a 10-foot wide, 60-foot long column that comes out from the dragon, we might say, okay, these are a little shorter and not nearly as easy to hit. So maybe we'll do a 20-foot cone instead of a 30-foot, or a, you know, a 40-foot line instead of a 60-foot line. But because of this, I really thought it'd be interesting to create dragons with an unlimited use breath attack. So for our CR8 monster up here, it suggested that an unlimited use AoE attack is 46 or 15 on average damage. So I'm going to be creating a whole bunch of different, you know, chromatic dragons right now that have this unlimited use attack here, 46 plus 15. Now, do we want to add anything else to our dragon? Sure, we could definitely do that. Let's take a look at what happens if we were to add in some traits. Let's see here. First off, we have our hit point traits. Everything here is going to modify our hit points and give us an effective hit point change. Let's take a look at what happens to our effective hit points here as I click it. So we go from the original 160-ish or so up to 202. Now that pushes us into the high range for our hit points. And honestly, if we add anything else, we're going to be throwing us well higher than we should honestly have for our dragon. For instance, if we also wanted to add in legendary resistance at this level, we could go ahead and click this and we'll say, oh, the typical 3. Let's go ahead and add 3 legendary resistances. How bad is that going to affect it? Well, sure enough, we're going to see, 262, and that definitely puts us above and beyond the hit point range of high. The suggestion here might be to keep as few traits as possible to keep your dragon as easy to run. So we need to make some decisions here on how many of these traits we want to actually use to affect our dragon, because too many and we'll end up with an overblown, bloated monster, too little, and it might be bland and boring. For instance, let's go ahead and take off Frightful Presence and see what our effective hit points look like with 1 legendary resistance. Once we do that, we end up with a 182, and that drops our effective hit points from the high range down into a moderate. Then next we have damage per round traits. Now these aren't necessarily going to affect anything down here, and as you can see, I have it marked to say, see the worksheet, and the worksheet is over here. This will help us see what to expect for damages, moderate damage, or low damage. And again, moderate is going to be for a CR8, low is going to be for a CR7, and high should be for a CR9, roughly. Now, I don't really believe there's anything I want to use here for our Black Dragon, but for the sake of this dragon, I'm going to say let's just stick to Legendary Resistance of 1, and move on past the damage per round, and maybe even the armor class traits here. And lastly, we have some attack bonus traits down here: Ambusher, Blood Frenzy, Nimble Escape, and Pack Tactics. None of these are really appropriate for a Black Dragon, so I'm going to skip that. Moving off to the side here, we do have our skills, and we can pick Proficient or Expert in any of these. I've also highlighted Perception here because of the passive perception of 12. If we want to say, our dragon here is good at an expert at deception because it's a black dragon, well then we'll have a +8 when we roll, or a +18 for its passive. Again, dragons are always usually extremely perceptive, so we're going to go ahead and give them an expert in perception, and then I would say limit the amount of experts you have there and kind of go for a few others. So our black dragons definitely going to want to be trained in stealth, so we have a +6 or 16 for passive. We could say acrobatics and give them, proficiency with dexterity, since they have that, and give them the little higher results for acrobatics here as well. And then lastly, we also have the resistances and immunities, also vulnerabilities. Now, obviously, since it's a black dragon, we're going to want to make it immune. Now, be careful adding too many of these, because at lower CRs, this is going to drastically increase the effective hit points of our dragon. So for every 3 or more that we choose in any of these columns, we're going to get a bonus here. So be careful. Now, if we have 1 immunity and 2 resistances, that technically doesn't count towards the bonus, but I've had a sneaking suspicion that they probably should add up together, since, they're reducing the amount of things that the dragon can take damage from. So we're going to say definitely immunities to acid. Could we add a vulnerability? What kind of vulnerability might be good for a black dragon? Because I'd like to start seeing more vulnerabilities for creative players here trying to do something. But maybe force could be considered, an earth-like or a base-like thing. So I'm going to just say, for the fun of it, let's go with vulnerabilities. And then lastly, we have our multi-attack worksheet here. Now, our dragon is definitely going to want some kind of a multi-attack, and we're going to take into consideration both of these attacks that our dragon is doing. We have our bite here, and we have our claws. So let's go ahead and definitely say we're going to do 2 melee attacks of some form. But we'll total up the most amount of damage here and say, what is their attack going to be together? It would be an 8 and a 12. We'll average that out to 10, just for the sake of this, because I only have 1 spot here for the most damage. So we'll go ahead and say, for now, the average is going to be 10. We'll have 2 attacks here with both of those, and then that'll give us a total of 20 total damage down here. Now, if we selected any of the damage per round or DPR traits here, we would see those added in here. So let's go ahead and say our dragon is aggressive and can use its bonus action to move closer to the targets. We would then see that the 2 gets added in here, and we would have a total of 22 damage so far just from our 2 attacks, but we haven't even hit the low range that's suggested of 45 to 50 damage per round. So now, because we are looking at using an unlimited acid breath that is just kind of like a quick burst, like a rather than a sustained like dragon breath where it just blows for the whole 6 seconds. This is something that lasts real brief. It's just a quick, 1 to 2 seconds, and then they go into a bite and a claw, or 2 claw attacks. So we're going to add in the unlimited use here of 15 DPR, and we have to remember, this is for 1 target. This is only one person being affected, so we have to double that to 30 technically. So our AoE damage is going to be 30, and we end up with 52 damage here if we keep the aggressive trait. Since our damage has just hit into the moderate range with the aggressive trait, let's take a look at the fun thing about this new tool that I've developed here. You're going to see the clear selection, which we used already to clear out my last dragon that I created. And now we have a new button here called print code. And I've been working at this one for a while, but let's see what happens when I click print code. So it's going to run the script that's going on here, and then it's going to give me this. This is an official stat block for the home brewery. Hard to say that one. From the one website, the home brewery website, where you can create official looking monster stat blocks. So you'll want to grab all of this here, and it's designed to grab everything that you've inputted for your monster. You'll see here that we have just the modifiers and not actual numbers for our stats, and our hit points are just the average. This is something that is very similar to Pathfinder, where they don't really worry about the dice rolls. I don't know how many people actually roll for their hit points, but when I roll, I always roll under the average. So I always take the average here. So what we do here is we just grab all of this, copy it, we go to the homebrewery.naturalcrit.com, and we go and create ourselves a new monster. So the nice thing here, once that goes away, to go here and input and print the code, because when you do that, you get yourself a immediate, almost perfect looking monster stat block here. And what's great is everything we've added is in the selection already. But we have attacks 3 and 4 here. We don't need attacks 3 and 4, so for the time being, we'll just come here and delete attacks 3 and 4. But we do have legendary resistance, we have the aggressive, we have all of our saving throws, we have our skills that we selected, even our damage vulnerabilities to force, our immunities to acid, and we have a spot for condition immunities. I haven't added those in just yet, but we do have the passive perception set up for plus 18. Languages are also something that will be picked later on, and then we have the challenge rating plus the proficiency bonus for our monster. So we have our armor type of 15. We need to give our monster a name. So with the power of editing, we will have a nicer looking stat block in a few moments. And there we go. We have ourselves a really nice looking stat block here after all of the small little adjustments for our juvenile Swift Black Dragon. Here's some other things to point out about the attack patterns for our Black Dragon, since we have ourselves an unlimited use here. For the multi-attack, I updated it so that the dragon makes a bite attack and a claw attack. Then, the dragon may make an acid spit before or after the multi-attack. Now that's the fun part about this. The dragon can make a 30-foot line attack with a DC 14 based off of what we chose before, dealing 46 or 15 acid damage on a failed save or half as much on a successful one. So our dragon, while not being able to necessarily attack at the full range of an adult black dragon, can use this almost every turn because it's making an acid spit rather than an acid stream or an acid breath attack. And then on top of that, we still have the aggressive here, which gives our dragon that little bit of a bonus, which we may have to remove depending on how this actually looks once we compare it to my older tool that will check this CR just to make sure that it's a CR 8 as we expect it to be. Some of you may notice or recognize this tool on the left here. This is my original checker here to make sure that the CRs that we're looking at are the appropriate ones. So let's go ahead and put everything that I've thrown in here for our dragon into the tool and see where it lands. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it lands on a CR8. So we have ourselves an AC of 15. We have ourselves a large dragon. Now here's the thing, since we only have a rough estimate of the hit points and average for 162, we're going to have to make some adjustments here. So we're going to go ahead and say we got 5. We'll need to add in 158. So we'll go over to the side here and just straight up add 158 extra hit points to give ourselves the 162 that we see on the right side. So sure enough, we got 163. It's fine. That's not a big deal. As we can see here, the hit point range is fine. Now we have our stat bonuses. We're not necessarily going to worry about that, but we do want to see the dexterity, con, and wisdom bonuses added in. So we're going to go ahead and add in 3 to 4 saves. We're going to go ahead and put in that this is supposed to be a CR8, and we don't have any major resistances or immunities, and we only have the 1 vulnerability. So there's only 1 of each, so we're not going to worry about either of these items here. Right off the bat, looking at our monster, we see that we have a DCR 8 so far, with just the little bit of hit points and the 3 to 4 saves here. But we do have the legendary resistance of once per day, so we'll go ahead and pop that in. So we'll go into here, hit 1, and watch how that adjusts. Very good. So this is nice to see. We have a DCR 8 so far. Now the fun part is trying to see if the OCR section actually lines up. So let's go ahead and add in our aggressive trait. All right, now we have ourselves a multi-attack of a bite and claw, which the bite is going to be worth 12 DPR. We'll put that there. The claw is worth 8 DPR, and we're hitting with a 5 or a 6 on both of these. So we'll average it out and we'll just say, you know, it's going to be a 6 between the two of them. So there's our bonus for that. And then we also have our acid spit, which we're going to be doing every round. So that's going to be 15, and we have to times that by 2. So we're expecting 30 damage for the acid spit every round of combat. We'll go ahead and make this the total multi-attacks. We'll just go ahead and sum all of that for a total of 50 points of damage per round, plus the 2 from aggressive. And then we will do this every round of combat. We get 50 points of damage, and we have ourselves a completely perfectly balanced black Swift Dragon at CR8. Wouldn't you know it? That's amazing. I love it. I love it when this happens. There we go. We have ourselves, with my new tool here, that prints the code out, a perfectly, properly balanced monster at CR8. If you made it this far, my thanks for you for watching this video is that you can use this black dragon yourself for free as well. There will be a link in the description below that will get you to the homebrewery for this juvenile Swift black dragon that you can use in your games as well and completely scare your players with it doing an acid spit every round of combat. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, let's create some more perfectly balanced monsters.